Good evening, good afternoon. Actually, I'm here at the Oyhel in a side room. Come to New York to participate in the Halocho, which is going to be in the Eretz Yisroel, upstate in the Catskills. So leaving soon from the Oyhel. There's a group of a camp having a rally in the background. So that's the sound you can hear in the background. So we're all working for the same. It just reminded me of a story that there's a time where the mitzvah tanks are going out and blaring music on the streets. And so they went in Manhattan, they went to the courthouse. And so there's a music blasting outside the courthouse, and the judge calls over whoever. He says, "Can you get that music to stop outside?" He goes outside, and there's a mitzvah tank there, and they show that they've got a permit. So the judge says, "My mission is to uphold the law, and these people are acting within the law. So case adjourned until next week, whatever." So we're all working for the same purpose and connecting to the special moments today. These few days of the 80th yahrzeit of the Rebbe's father, Rov Levi Yitzchok, was Rov and Katrina. So that's the celebration here. I'm going to raise my voice as much as I can, more appropriate, so that we should be able to focus on the questions. Just one moment. Okay, so let's go down to our first question. Some bochrim asked me, they're learning the halachas of brachas on food, and it comes up that when you have fruit from shivas haminim, so then we would say the bracha, what we call in Yiddish we call it alamichya. Really, it's called bracha me'en shalosh. And so the bochrim will, so they say you say the bracha me'en shalosh, and if it's fruit not just from this shivas haminim, but actually grew in Eretz Yisroel. So here the Gemara says, and here you got from the Alter Rebbe in the Siddur, in Birchanen, he says, "Uvi Eretz Yisroel al ha'aretz v'al peri seho." Say the bracha for Eretz Yisroel and its fruit, not just v'al ha'peris in the abstract, but more in the possessive peri seho. Not only that, if you have fruit of Eretz Yisroel which were exported, also we'll say al ha'aretz v'al peri seho. Okay, that's understood. Then we have a second halacha. That was halacha yud beis, perik beis. And halacha yud gimel and perik beis says the following: what happens if you have had mezoines, and you had wine, and you had of the fruit of shivas haminim? So then you're going to incorporate all three, or two, if whatever the case is, into one bracha. And so instead of saying it three times, you're going to say the same text. And in the beginning and the end, you're going to incorporate the various elements. So let's see. You'd say, well, thank you, Hashem, ala oretz, for the land, for the sustenance, agefen, baruch to Hashem, ala oretz, agefen, okay, this is also emphasized in Hayom Yom, how we don't say ve'ala peres, but pri agefen peres. Another discussion. Meanwhile, the bochim asked the following. So you say ala oretz for the land, ve'ala michya for the sustenance and the fruit of the vine, ve'ha peres. What happens when you say ala oretz ve'al peres seho? If it were fruit from Eretz Yisroel, and let's say the wine is from France, you'll have to say ala oretz ve'ala michya ve'al pri agefen ve'o peres seho. Now that's very confusing because Periseo would then seem to be Periseo of the of the vine, which is obviously not the pshat. You want to say that the Perisel refers to the Eretz. So here you have on the screen from a tzida, which is in talking about when you have wine from Eretz Yisroel. So then it's al ha'orez v'al ha'michyo v'al pri gafno v'al Perisel. There it's clearer when you've said pri gafno. But if you say al pri agefin or Perisel, then that's quite confusing. And I don't really have an answer to that. So, yeah. I looked around, couldn't find a solution to that. Let's move on. These Bochrim also asked me what happens. We know that there's particularly one word in the Torah which we have a different sources how it's spelt, whether it's spelt with a hey or with an aleph. So we have the word I think Dakoh b'kal Hashem. So the word Dakoh can be is an our mesorah from the Alter Rebbe, and there's many early manuscripts to support this. The word Dakoh is spelt with an aleph, as we say also in Tilim. Is it in chapter Tzadik? I think you got Rov of Anash ad Dakoh. However, most other Ashkenazim spell it with a hey, and the word Dakoh is like many words in Hebrew, which are descriptive words which are describing something. They will finish off like Gedoylo, etc., with a finish off with a hey. So Dakoh is also, they pronounce it, they spell it with a hey. Okay, so we know that if a Sefer Torah has got a misspelling, so then it wouldn't be kosher, and we wouldn't do Kriyas HaTorah with a Sefer Torah which has got a word spelled wrong. So now what happens if a Chabadnik turns up in another shul where they have a Sefer Torah spelled with a hey, or if a Veltashid comes to Chabad shul and they say he has a Sefer Torah spelled with an aleph, can they have an Aliya l'Torah? Can you have an Aliya l'Torah in a Torah which is spelled not the way your mesorah is? So the answer is yes. And here you have in the footnote, you have a note here from Reb Chaim Noah in Ksas HaShulchan Siman Pei Zayin. He says, Avdova Poshut, that if you have a Sefer Torah, even according to the Alter Rebbe's mesorah, but if you have a Sefer Torah written with a hey, you don't have to switch the Sefer Torah. So here's the question: why is it okay if it's spelled wrong? Why is it okay? So the backing for this is the Shittah of Shuvas Harambam, that Kriyas HaTorah is valid even if the Sefer Torah isn't kosher. So the word is like this: that just like a mezuzah, if it's missing a letter, the mezuzah isn't kosher. So too, if the Sefer Torah is missing a letter or is spelled wrong, so then you haven't fulfilled the mitzvah of Ksiva Sefer Torah. So you haven't, the mitzvah Torah isn't valid, but it doesn't necessarily mean that Kriyas HaTorah is contingent upon a valid Sefer Torah. The strongest proof to this is that it says in the Gemara, Ein koyrim b'chumshin mipnei kvedat tzibur. In the times of the Mishnah, they would have a scroll of Brachis, a scroll of Shmois, a scroll of Vayikra, etc. And so the Gemara says you can't use those scrolls, which are written on parchment, etc. The same writing. It's not respectful. So although it's 80% of the Sefer Torah is missing, it's just got Sefer Shmois, for example. So the problem is not respectful. But other than that, it would be okay. So we don't rely on that lechatchila. You don't rely on this. And if you know the Sefer Torah's got a letter missing, you don't take out the Sefer Torah. That's true. But to say the Sefer Torah, that if it's in the middle of a Kriyas HaTorah, it's being used for Kriyas HaTorah, to say that therefore I can't have an Aliya, once it's being used, one can be makel and rely on that opinion. So I said this over. I was at a Yachekala, a Kinas Torah in Lugano. So one of the participants asked the question, what about Parshas Zochor? So another one of the participants, Rav Lieberman from Zurich, raised Talmud Chochem, Used to be a Rosh Hashiva in Luzern. It was as a greater Talmud Chochem, Kachzach in the Rebbe Mesiches. At any rate, so Rav Lieberman, he raised the point that actually by Parshas Zochor, it comes from a Sefer Torah, a kosher Sefer Torah is more important because it says, there it says, there should be a remembrance from a sefer. Therefore, the conclusion of that is, although we're more easygoing about Kriyas Torah in a Sefer Torah, which may be spelt not according to our mesorah, but for Parshas Zochor, one should be that little bit more, a lot more, however, much more careful about that. All right, let's move on. So also these boys, they sent me a whole list of questions before I went down to Lugano. One of them was about what's guidelines about mentioning one's mother or father by name. So every frum kid knows that you don't mention your father's name or your mother's name. It's not respectful, not part of kibbut avim. So you call it b'shmoi. What happens if you want to have an Aliya Torah? You're being called up, and they ask you, what's your father's name? Or very often you see someone comes over to a kid and asks him, what's your name? He says his name is his surname. But they want to know who are his parents. Know the family name, well, who is his parents? Is the child allowed to say the parents' first name? So let's read. To save time, I went to the Sefer Torah, and he has the following entry. He has that the Chidah says one is allowed to mention the father's name even if he's present, if you add a title. As you say, Adoni my father, Adoni Ovi, Abba Mori, Mori Ovi, etc. That's the opinion of the Chidah, and probably the Sfardim would follow that. But the Marshal says that you're not allowed to mention your father's name, even if you add a title. Then he goes on to say in the next, that was in paragraph Mechov Tes, paragraph Lamed Daled, it says, however, where there's a need, then you would be allowed to mention a parent's name by mentioning a title. So if someone asks you, who's your father? So you can say Reb Ploini, Reb so-and-so. Or you could say, my father's name is Kach v'Kach. I'm not so satisfied with this psak. By the way, he's saying this clearly only sheloi b'fanav, yeah? B'fanav, everyone should be more careful. All right, there's no real need usually to mention one's father's name in their parents' presence. But it's all very well to say for a man, my father's name is Reb, whatever it may be. What do you do if someone asks your mother's name? It's not so common to say with a title. And so what would you do there? So don't think that's adequate of a explanation and a guidance. Okay. But it seems to be that if there's a need, one would be allowed to respond. And by saying so-and-so is my mother, that itself in a way is a title. That's what some of the parts we wanted to say. Okay, so now, as I said, I was in Lugano. You may remember a video of someone who comes by the Rebbe by dollars, and he's talking about Oysa Ha'ish, and the Rebbe is very abrupt with him. And this person actually lives in Lugano. He's now probably in his 90s, but at any rate, so the question is, if a person is, unfortunately, still an active mummer, he believes in Yoshke, and he's Jewish, and he's amenable to put on tefillin. Can you put on tefillin with such a person? Do you say, oh, he's going to have wrong machshavos, etc.? So this was their question. Can you put on tefillin with someone who is involved in a different religion? So what you have on the screen is from Siman Kuf Pei Tes in Orach Chaim, And it's talking about when it comes to benching, towards the end, we have a bracha for all those who are present. And so, Ken Yivorech Esonu Kolonu Yach. So now, if there is present someone who's a mumer, who is a Jew, who is an apostate, who has left Yiddishkeit, mumer means he's switched. He's switched to a different religion, different faith. Do you when if there's a goy present, you say b'nei bris to exclude the goy who's not ben bris? What about the mumer? So the Magen Avraham says you should also exclude him by saying ben bris to exclude this person. Now, with all the respect that the Alter Rebbe has for the Magen Avraham, he also has great respect for another less well-known posek called in his Sefer known the Even HaOizer, which is at the back of the Shulchan Aruch. And the Even HaOizer disagrees with the Magen Avraham on this, and he takes the view that a mumer still has the status of ben bris. And therefore, there's no point in saying b'nei bris to exclude it because the mumar is still a ben bris. And he talks there about shlichus, that the mumer is still eligible to be made into a shliach because afal pishechoto Yisroel. And you can see here on the screen that the Alter Rebbe indeed paskins like the Even HaOizer, at least in relation to benching. Even though he's gone astray, but he's still included in the status of bnei bris. Although he has sinned, Yisroel, who is still considered a yid. Therefore, when there's a mumer present, you don't say kolonu yacha bnei bris to exclude him because he is part of bnei bris. And therefore, coming back to our question, can you put on tefillin with such a person? He's chayiv b'mitzvahs tefillin, and you can put on tefillin with him and worry about his machshavos. It could very well be yeah. Right. Someone's pointing out about going back to names that in Ribono Shel Olam and before we check out Sefer Torah and Yom Tov and in Yizkor, according to Minhag Chabad, we mention the mother's name. That's definitely true. And when that's as I said before, when you are mentioning your mother as your mother, that in itself could be seen as a title, which makes it less of a problem. In a sense, yeah. Okay. Another point with these boys asked, probably something new for them, see a yard for a Sefer Torah, because in Chabad that's not so popular. And so they were asking, what's the rules about this yard? Has it got a kedusha? So after looking around, I saw the following. There's a sefer which I have which specializes all about shemus, called Kinzei HaKodesh. And he says here that the bells and the various other ornaments placed on the on the wooden rollers of the Sefer Torah, they are considered tashmishe kedusha, which means they are appurtenances of something which is sacred, and as a result, they should be put in gniza. If they are no longer usable, they should be put in shemus, kind of thing. And then he says so too the articles which are placed on the Sefer Torah b'kriyas, even if they're not made there to adorn the Sefer Torah, but they are there always to accompany the Sefer Torah, and therefore he calls them tashmishe kedusha. He quotes here Pinchas Scheinberg, who gave him that psak. That a yad, even if it wasn't fancy, it would also require gniza. And certainly, if it is a nice piece, a silver one, it's considered also a tashmishe kedusha and the pertinence of the Sefer Torah. It's just interesting to, on a side, someone was in contact with me this morning that they are trying to declutter their home, and they found they have many old videos videos of the Rebbe, cassettes, and then they also have got old mezuzah cases. So what can they do with them? So I told them that the videos you are allowed to wrap them in a bag respectfully, and then you can put them and discard them respectfully. The tapes themselves do not have a kedusha. Whereas the mezuzah cases, as you can see here, they've got the mezuzah is tashmish kedusha. It's got Hashem's name written in it, etc. And so the mezuzah case would also have a status of tashmish kedusha, which one wouldn't be allowed to discard in a disrespectful way. Just today, someone sent to me a question. He saw, oh, sorry. I'm on for now for question number 6. Then the last slides are not in the right order. Someone is asking the question. He was eating mesorahs, and after a while, he decides, well, I've had so much, really, I should have said Amotzi, but now I'm not interested in having more mesorahs, but I realize I have to do the full benching, but I would like to have a piece of fish now. So let's look at this carefully, two scenarios. One is you've eaten a fair amount of mesorahs, not an excessive amount, but you are hungry, and you want to have more, because you don't have any bread, so you want to have more mesorahs. So then, here you have from the Alter Rebbe, I think it's Pei Beis also, Pei Gimel, that if you started off having mesorahs as a snack, and then you change your mind that you wish to now have enough to have a shiur of a Suda, so then, to avoid the question, what do you do now? Do you make a new bracha or not? The Alter Rebbe says, say Brocho Acharona on what you've had, then take a little break, then you wash until you die, have a moitzi, and then you'll have the rest. I once had a case. I arrived in Heathrow Airport to get a 9 o'clock flight, 10 o'clock flight, and they tell me, I'm sorry, but you are actually not booked in for this flight. For some mix up, so I wasn't on the flight. So they said, but we can put you on the afternoon flight. So now I had relied on having a kosher meal on the plane. And now if I'm put onto a next plane, so there's not going to be a kosher meal for me there. So I was a bit concerned how will I manage for the next, it wasn't worth to go back into town and back home, etc. So what could I do as far as having kosher sandwiches? So Baruch Hashem, this is useful for people to know that in Heathrow Airport, you can go to some of the news agents, whatever, or they sell sandwiches, and you can buy kosher sandwiches, the hechsher, etc. So I went there, but then all the sandwiches say on the mesorahs. So I'm a very tiny fan of mesorahs bread. So what do I do now? So I bought a couple of packets and decided this is going to be my meal, and use that and made hamotzi. So if you know that you're going to have a lot of mesorahs instead of bread, so then it's hamotzi and finished. What happens if you switch in the middle? That's complicated, and therefore the Alter Rebbe says take a break, make a Brocho Acharona, take a break, and then wash and have hamotzi, and may say hamotzi for the remainder. That's what he says there in Halocho. That's one scenario. The scenario which you have over here is different. The person, let's say, has had more than enough of mesorahs, not intended to have any more mesorahs, therefore is not intending to say hamotzi, does not have any, and not going to have any more of that. Just wants to have a piece of fish. So now it's going to say full benching, which means that he's had a suda. Or do you say no? This is his dilemma, yeah? Do you say, well, since you're going to say full benching, therefore you're in the middle of a meal, and therefore you don't have to say brach on the piece of fish? Or do you say that till now it wasn't a meal, so although you're going to have to say benching, but doesn't have the status of a meal, and he remains in a sophic about that. All right, so again, that doesn't have a clear answer. Let's move on. Oh, so then we had the question of someone that noticed it's become quite popular in the last 10, 20 years of these reinforced tefillin containers. And especially the tzaddikim who are going to the Mesiras Nefesh to protect Yidden in Eretz Yisroel, the Yidden in soldiers in Tzahal, so they take there's tefillin with them, but the regular soft velvet bag is not so safe for the tefillin, the pressures, etc. So you got these tubes. They look like a big thermos, and you can fit the tefillin in. Actually, they got a special size for Chabad tefillin. You can fit the tefillin in, and then they also have like a wrapper around it for the talis. So, but the way it is, it's like a tube, and the shiur sits on top of the shalrosh. So this person was asking, is it okay to have the tefillin shiur sitting on the shalrosh? So this is actually not a new question. And you can see it here on the screen, on Siman Chof Ches in Hilchos Tefillin, Siman Chof Ches Seif Ches. So you can read it from the text. When you put the tefillin in the tick in the pouch, one should be careful that when you take them out, you should not confront the head tefillin first, because then you're going to have to put it aside to take the shiur first, because we have to put on the shiur before the shalrosh. And therefore, it recommends to use a long, narrow pouch, and the shalrosh will be lower down in the pouch, and the shiur will be on the top of towards the front of the pouch. And then he adds, there's no problem that the shiur is on top of the shalrosh, even though the shalrosh has got a greater kedusha, because ultimately the inner content is the same. Yeah, the parshas inside are the same. So this is the approach which it has in the first paragraph here, that it's okay to put a shiur on shalrosh. Why is a shalrosh more chamur? Well, the idea that you got the shins, etc. That may be the reasons why the shalrosh is more chamur, but it says nevertheless it's okay to put the shiur on top of the shalrosh. The second paragraph said there are those who are more sensitive to this, and they will not put the shiur and shalrosh in one pouch, rather keep them in separate pouches, and somehow the shiur is a little bit further forward. So I never really understood the two pouches, which we don't. That's certainly not our custom. Custom is to have the shiur and shalrosh in the one pouch, and the shiur is to the left and the shalrosh is to the right. Okay, so to sum up, when necessary, there is certainly to rely on to have the shiur on top of the shalrosh, especially with these tubes. They are normally carried horizontally, and therefore the shiur and shalrosh are actually side by side, not one on top of the other. Nevertheless, the general meaning is not so, as we can see, that we all know this, that we normally put them side by side. Okay, let's move on. Okay, we got into a whole thing about stocker by night and at night. And on the bottom left of the screen, we have the sikha from Rosh Chodesh Menachem Ov Tofshin Lamed Vov, which was published recently. And the Rebbe is talking about giving stocker at night, and he mentions the idea of Hasogas Gevul. So he went this last week, I went through the whole story about the Malach being upset with the Tana who was giving out stocker at night, and he says, you are encroaching on my territory, and the Tana gave him a strong answer. But meanwhile, the Rebbe here in this sikha says that then about stocker at night, it's a difference whether you're putting stocker into a pushka, or if an oni, the poor man, confronts you and asks for stocker. So here it seems to be that if a poor man confronts you, then for sure you give stocker by night. But by putting money in a pushka by night doesn't seem to be recommended. And we showed in perhaps other sources, but afterwards, there's someone who put together a sefer called Birurei Minhagim. His name is Reb Shabsi Friedman, lives in Sfas. And he, in his sefer, this is really when I looked first to research this, he has a whole list of things which we don't do or do at night, and he talks about this. And he gave me a reference to a sikha, as you can see on the screen, from Tov Shin Mem Dalet. And here the Rebbe at Fabrengen, which is in the evening, the Rebbe Fabrengen were almost always at night, and he says that the Indian of they are not giving tzedakah by night. That's only if you go to look for an oni to whom to give tzedakah, as in the story in the Yerushalmi. But if the oni comes and asks you, then that's for sure you give them. Then the Rebbe says, Arei Hashem, when we're talking about a halochic to give tzedakah, that's for sure not a problem. Well, derech zeh, if you give the tzedakah to the gizbar, to the gabbai, you put it into a tzedakah pushka, if you write a check or a pledge, so that since the oni is only going to get it the following day, that's not a problem. But here, in passing, the Rebbe said giving it to a gizbar, to a treasurer of tzedakah, or putting it into a tzedakah pushka. So here the Rebbe seems to condone the idea of giving in a tzedakah pushka by night, since it's going to reach to the poor man at a later stage. And similarly, we have here another sikha on the sheet which I gave you this morning. We have a reference to where the sikha is. I'm just looking at this is Tov Shin Mem. And again, the Rebbe is talking about tzedakah, and he says, Afal pi, as if you say kimeduber, he's talking about the inyan of tzedakah balaylo. Was afal pi, das ist doch balaylo, hebst du von der ganze Schachlevetari of tzedakah balaylo. Kalpon kimeduber kamen paomim, mevavta rein die tzedakah in a tzedakah pushka. When you put money into a tzedakah pushka or community hamadina that people give tzedakah with a check, then there's no problem to see in tzedakah balaylo. So there seems to be conflicting sources in the Rebbe's sikhs, whether he sees giving to tzedakah pushka at night being an issue or not being an issue. Last week we had the story of the Rebbe when he was in Paris and he put in the tzedakah, but that was in the special circumstances he explained. Someone just sent me a message this morning. He remembers seeing the Rebbe before Ma'ariv, after Ma'ariv, but putting some pennies and some coins in the tzedakah. So in the tzedakah pushka. So it's, as I say, it's not so clear cut. Doesn't seem to be a standard thing. But if someone has a need to put money in tzedakah at night, so that's certainly fine. Yeah. Okay. So following it on from this discussion, so someone asked, what about giving tzedakah in an impure location? I'm going to just see someone put something on the chat. Right, so someone's asking what kind of tzedakah cannot be given at night. A very good question. What the point is to go, the story of the Gemara is, he went to this person's house and dropped it through their, as we'd call that, their letterbox. He went to their house and gave them tzedakah. So that kind of tzedakah would be preferably done by day rather than by night. So this comes to the following question. What happens if, let's say nowadays people have their handheld computer and they could be sitting in a place where they can't say learn Divrei Torah, going through their emails or their WhatsApps, and there's an appeal for tzedakah. And then they can click on it and then send by credit card, send a donation. So he's asking, is it appropriate to give tzedakah if you are in a location where you can't say a brocha? It's not a... So, yeah. So the issue is, though, he says, often there I'm more relaxed. I'll go out, then with WhatsApps, it's going to be the 15th down the and it's going to be forgotten. So he'll deal with it now. It'll happen. If he doesn't deal with it now, he very likely will forget about it. So this is the question. I wasn't so comfortable because tzedakah is a mitzvah. So is it okay to do a mitzvah in a place where this is kind of what it boils down to? So the answer is you can. The answer is you can fulfill a mitzvah even if you can't say a bracha. So So let's say putting on tzitzis. Yeah, people are after mikveh, they put on a pair of tzitzis. Maybe they even put on a new pair of tzitzis. Just I'm going to throw this one in. People could change. You go to mikveh on Friday afternoon and get ready for Shabbos. So, like you change your shirt for Shabbos, you should be putting on a fresh talis cotton for Shabbos. There's either a special dedicated one for Shabbos or at least a clean one for Shabbos. Als big day Shabbos, the talis cotton is no less important a garment than anything else. It should be a beged for Shabbos. So that means that after mikveh on Friday, you're going to put on a fresh talis cotton. Then when you come out, you're going to make a bracha. No, when do you check the tzitzis? So inside, before you put it on, you have to check the tzitzis. Like before you put on the talis, you check the tzitzis. Is it okay to check tzitzis in the mokim where you can't say bracha? And the answer is yes, that's okay. So I looked around and I saw here a reference to a couple of places. There's Piskei Shuvas and Siman Ayin Vav. He says, if it's a mitzvah which the opportunity may later not be available. So therefore, let's say there's a person in a bathhouse who needs to have help, and for sure you can help them. And it's a mitzvah of Gemilas Chesed and covered hidur. It's not covered as such, but as respect, someone has a need to help them, and one could give tzedakah also in such a location. Right. So if people need something there and to give them something there, it's not as if the Eibush is not there, yeah? You can't say a brocha, but the Eibush is there and you can do a mitzvah there. There's a quote here from Reb Shlomo Zalman Auerbach also. But tzedakah is staver that if he meets up with an oni and the place is not clean, then you don't have to say, oh, let's go somewhere else. I'll give you tzedakah somewhere else. You can give him right there and then, even though the place is impure. That's related to the famous idea. Why don't we say at brocha? For giving tzedakah. So one of the reasons given, we have never, the guy is starving, hungry, and you're going to say, oh, wait till you put on your gartel and say a brocha. And meanwhile, the fellow is starving. So that's not a wise thing to do. Right. The last thing we have on the list is about the discussion about whether an oval Rahman al-Islam should or shouldn't be chazen on Tisha B'Av, and the argument against was saying, since he is a subject of dinim, therefore he shouldn't be bringing on dinim at this time, Tisha B'Av, which is a time of dinim. So one of our listeners said when he was in this position, he was told that is not an issue, for the simple reason that unfortunately on Tisha B'Av all of us are Avelim. Therefore, why should the oval be any worse than anyone else? All the Yidden are Avelim for the Churban. And so he said that doesn't matter if the oval goes to the Omid. And as I said, as far as I remember, people who are Chiyuvim would daven at the Omid. On Tisha B'Av too. The Rikki is that Loksa B'Kiflayim, so it should be in the Choma B'Kiflayim. And just to finish off with the famous word of the Rebbe's father of Machashin of Sun al Mayas Hamayro, Hagal to. So there's a lot has been written up recently about this, but I just read this letter of the Rebbe, which he wrote he writes to someone, to Rav Havlin, and it was a few months after his father passed away. He says he's very behind in things, and because of the tragedy which he had that his father passed away. And then he says a word which he heard from his father. So he says, a needle which is on the steps of the cave where there is the pool of water. So he explains that machat is a needle, and that refers to the neshama beguf, because the neshama be'id is created, a human being is created different to anyone else. All other creatures were created in one go, but the human was created first a body, and then a neshama was breathed in, because our function is to connect the upper and the lower, the elyon b'yosem and the tachton b'yosem. That's what a needle is. A needle is to sew the elyon b'yosem and the tachton b'yosem. That's what the needle is for. So that's the machat. Machat is a neshama, a beguf, whose mission is to connect the Elyon and the Tach. I saw in another quote that's like a Kabbalah, it's sewing together the upper of the shoe and the lower and the sole of the shoe. That's another angle, but bichlal, it's the idea of a needle to connect, to sew together the upper and the lower. The Meire is a cave. That's Elam Hazeh. It's like a deep pit, and it's a challenging environment. So then you have Milas Hamayre. Milas Hamayre means that this pit, it has an union of Mila, that through this the neshama can fulfill its mission and reach even higher than it was before. That's the Milas Hamayre. So then it says, the is the inyan of Rotziv Hashem. He talks about not being kaima achad kaima or something. Not being stuck in one car, but rather being, you can, whether it's in Torah mitzvahs, whether it's in other yonim, not necessarily to be stuck in one place, but you are flexible. If this is required, if this is required, you're ready to do that. That's the way I understand. That's the that you are, instead of being just focused on one particular direction and not exclusively, which might be your own particular tendency. But the fact that you are flexible is an expression of bitul to something which is higher than oneself, to the Eibishter, Rotzen. That's the moy mecha b'mayim. Then he says kiva she'oval hagal tehoira. So he talks about the gal, and then he quotes the famous story in the Gemara in Yevomas Daf Kuf Chaf Aleph Amad Aleph about when Rebbe Akiva was on a ship, and the ship got shipwrecked, and it broke apart. And there was another of the Chachamim who saw this ship falling apart, and he was sure that everyone in the ship would have drowned. And then he sees one Chacham who had managed to survive, and this was Rebbe Akiva. And he asked Rebbe Akiva, "How did you survive?" So he says, I held on to a plank of wood. And then he says, "Val kol gal v'gal," every wave, as it was raising, coming upon me, he bowed to subdue himself to the wave, rather than standing up to resist the wave. He was misbattled to the wave, and in this way he survived. That you look up the Gemara in of Aleph, and then you know the way to survive the challenges would be through a bittul rather than a resistance. That's the understanding from the Gemara. And then he says the kol gal v'gal. So the Rebbe connects this with the inyan of goyla, which means exile, and goyla b'soich goyla, an exile in an exile. So I had the schus several years ago when the Kinus HaShluchim of Europe was held in Russia. So we went on Chof O. We went to Almata, and the cemetery, it's a Goyish cemetery, and I felt really nauseated to walk through that cemetery. It's a Goyish cemetery, and you've got all of these Goyish stones. But also they've got, it's very common in Russia to have busts of the images of the deceased. So you're passing by all of these like little statues of all these Grabba Goyim from the region. And this is where you're going to Reb Leivik's resting place. So you have to pass through all of this until you come to Reb Leivik's resting place, which is surrounded with a metal fence, which is in Russia quite common, that they would have family plots surrounded with a metal fence. And that's where you have, so I felt really this golus beter golus, multiplied a few times. Actually, at that kinus, there was someone by the name of Mordechai Gerelik. He had been in Yechidus, and at the time the Rebbe had a svara of exhuming the remains of his father and bringing them to Yisroel, to America, I don't know. And then the Rebbe kind of, in the Yechidus, kind of looking into space, so to speak, and his all blind. Let it stay where it is. And at any rate, so coming back to the Gal, so just like you have the story of Rebbe Akiva who says Gal and another Gal, and that all of that, those waves brought him to a state of Tahara. So the Rebbe says also here by the union of his father, Goyla Acha Goyla, Kimash Obele Hagal, Tahira brings to a state of Tahara. The Rebbe shall help in. We should see the Gula Shleimet Mashiach Tzidkenu and the Bala Yelula and our Rebbe Bereishom, Besimchas Olam Al Reishom, mit Shalayim Ira Kodesh, Besamigdosh, Sachzeno Inenu, Besimchas Olam Al Rosheinu. Walter.